You're in the middle of explaining something at work, and suddenly your mind goes blank. Your voice gets tight, and you rush through the rest of the sentence. That's the moment when English feels like it's slipping away. But here's the secret. Instead of freezing or apologizing, ask a follow-up question. It buys you time and shows confidence. For example, say, "What I mean is," and then rephrase. That tiny pause resets the conversation and makes you sound thoughtful, not panicked. The larger question behind when your English sounds too under pressure. Ask a follow-up question is not just what to say, but how to enter the conversation without sounding defensive.
So the real cost of not doing this is that you appear less competent than you actually are. I remember a colleague who'd stumble over technical terms, then just trail off. Everyone assumed he didn't know the material. But he did. He just didn't have a recovery phrase. If he had said, "Let me rephrase that," or "to put it differently," he would have owned the room. The stakes are high because first impressions stick. But a smooth follow-up can erase that awkward moment. The larger question behind when your English sounds too under pressure. Ask a follow-up question is not just what to say, but how to enter the conversation without sounding defensive.
Let's look at a common mistake. Someone says, "I think the project, needs more time." That and the pause signal doubt. The problem isn't the idea, it's the hesitation. A native speaker would often use a filler like, "Well, actually, what I'm getting at is." That's not a crutch, it's a strategic bridge. The mistake is treating silence as failure. Instead, use a discourse marker to show you're processing. What I mean is, frames your next words as a clarification, not a correction. In real English, context controls tone more than the dictionary meaning of a single word.
So let's build a phrase ladder. Start with the stiff version. I am not sure if. That's okay, but weak. Let me think about that for a second. Already more confident. Great question. What I'm really trying to say is, that's a power move. You're complementing the question while buying time. The final rung. To answer that, I'd like to rephrase my earlier point. That sounds authoritative. Each step adds a pause that feels intentional, not nervous. In real English, context controls tone more than the dictionary meaning of a single word.
Let's test it in a real exchange. Jake, you ask me a tricky question. How would you prioritize the next sprint? I could panic, but instead I say, that's a key point. Let me clarify my thinking. I'd focus on the user feedback first because, see how I used a follow-up question to myself? I didn't answer immediately. I reframed. That's natural. It signals that I'm taking the question seriously. The phrase worth keeping is by, "That sounds natural." The important distinction is between a feeling and a case. A feeling says, "I want this." A case says, "Here is why this request is reasonable."
Now let's compare tones. That's fine with friends. If I may rephrase, that works in meetings. What I'm feeling is, that builds connection. To be precise, that commands respect. Allow me to elaborate. That's for presentations. Each version changes how you're perceived. The key is matching the register to the situation. Under pressure, people often default to a stiff tone, but with practice, you can choose the right color for the moment. The phrase worth keeping is, "That sounds natural." The important distinction is between a feeling and a case.
There's a cultural expectation here. In many English-speaking workplaces, hesitation is interpreted as uncertainty. But if you frame it as, "Let me think aloud," that's seen as collaborative. Native speakers often say, "I'm just processing that out loud," to normalize a pause. It's a hidden rule. You're allowed to think, but you have to announce it. Otherwise, silence feels like you're stuck. So the next time you feel pressure, say, "I'm gathering my thoughts." It's honest and it buys you a few seconds. A realistic version might begin with a soft entry. "I wanted to talk about my compensation and the value I have been bringing to the team."
Listen to the rhythm of a confident follow-up question. What I mean is, has a rising intonation on mean, then a slight pause. That signals you're about to deliver clarity. Contrast that with, I mean, you know, which sounds unsure. The stress matters, with a clear emphasis. Also, note that native speakers often use a filler phrase like actually before the follow-up. Actually, what I meant was. That actually softens the correction and sounds polite. A realistic version might begin with a soft entry. I wanted to talk about my compensation and the value I have been bringing to the team.
Now let's turn up the pressure. You're in a Q&A after a presentation and someone challenges your data. Are you sure about those numbers? Your heart races. Instead of defending, use a follow-up. That's a fair question. Let me double-check my reasoning. It sounds collaborative, not defensive. Then say, to clarify, I based that on the Q3 report. Does that align with your understanding? You've turned a confrontation into a dialogue, invites cooperation. The nuance is that polite English is not always softer English. Sometimes the most respectful sentence is the one that is direct enough to save everyone from guessing.
I once had to explain a complex idea to a client and froze. I said, "Sorry, I'm not explaining this well." That made things worse. Later, I learned to say, "Let me try a different angle." That simple shift changed everything. My personal rule now, never apologize for thinking. Instead, own it. I want to make sure I'm clear, so let me rephrase. That's honest and confident. It also shows you care about the listener's understanding. That kind of move builds trust faster than a perfect first answer. The nuance is that polite English is not always softer English.
But what if your first sentence lands badly? Say you blurt out, "That's not right." That sounds harsh. Repair it immediately with, "Let me rephrase that." I mean, that's one perspective, but here's another. You've softened the disagreement. Or if you interrupt someone, say, "Sorry, let me finish my thought first, then I'd love to hear yours." That's a repair move. The key is to acknowledge the misstep without dwelling. A quick, "let me put it another way," can erase a bad start. The takeaway is that fluent English is not about sounding fancy.
So here's the payoff. The next time you feel pressure, don't fight it. Use it as a cue to ask yourself a follow-up question. What do I really mean? Then say it. The pattern is simple. Pause, acknowledge the question, and rephrase. That's a great point. What I'm trying to say is that one sentence does everything. It buys time, shows confidence, and clarifies your message. Memorize that line. It's your safety net. And remember, sounding natural isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. The takeaway is that fluent English is not about sounding fancy.